Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Complete Tech Heads with me, Tom Edwards. This week, I am delighted to be joined by Rauli Partanen. I believe I've pronounced that correctly, but he can correct me if I'm wrong. Who is an award-winning science writer on energy, nuclear, and climate. He's the co-founder of Eco Modernist, which has another name which he can introduce very shortly. I'll get a quick intro in a minute. And the CEO at Think Atom. And this week we are going to be talking about energy with a particular focus on nuclear, which is a subject that I've been fascinated by for some time now. So I'm really excited to speak to an expert on this, I think, extremely promising and underused form of energy. But I want to hear what Rauli thinks. So Rauli, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for the invitation.
Awesome. So look, I would love to kick off, first of all, just with a brief intro to you. I've given a quick bio there, but just tell me a bit about yourself, how you kind of got interested in energy in general and nuclear in particular, and what your background is. If you are interested in extending your own healthy lifespan, then I can't recommend this week's partners enough. DoNotAge.org is a company dedicated to helping people like you and me extend their health span through supplementation. On the website, you can check out all of the different supplements that they sell, accompanied by a whole section on the science behind them. You can read the links on where they've got their research from, check out the team that's working on it, and of course, pick up those all-important supplements for yourself. So go to the site and use the code CTH for a 10% discount. You can also find the link in the description for this show.
Yeah, I'm actually from kind of the communications background myself. I've done IT stuff in the 2000s. Everybody was doing websites and stuff like that. And then around 2010, I got interested in resource scarcity, energy, and climate change, environmental stuff, and all kind of that. Started reading a lot about that, and then everybody had a blog back then. I don't know if you remember. So I created a blog, started blogging, and people seemed to like how I kind of discussed different things about peak oil and all that kind of stuff. So I decided to write a book. I did, and that did really well here in Finland. So writing the next book became easier because you got a grant. The first book was actually nominated for 2 of the nonfiction book awards here in Finland, and it was about the peaking of oil demand or production and how our society is or is not prepared for that. Because I mean, oil is is the biggest primary energy source and keeps the society humming and all that stuff. So it was interesting. But then I actually got interested also and it was in 2013 that the book came out. Then I got interested on climate and nuclear a little bit more because I noticed that there's this kind of gap between what the, let's say, literature was telling us about nuclear energy, what kind of energy is it, and then there's the public debate that was completely different. So I got interested in that, and me and my co-author Janne Korhonen decided to write a book about that, which became a kind of short, well, maybe a pamphlet, but evidence-based. So we do cite our resources. It's not an opinion piece. Called Climate Gamble, is anti-nuclear activism endangering our future. That has been translated to 7 languages. And we even went to the Paris COP21 climate negotiations and handed out a couple thousand copies of those books, which we crowdfunded. So that was interesting.
How did that go?
Well, I mean, I got my first burnout on that.
Really?
On
Wow.
that trip. I mean, it was chaotic, fun, chaotic, extremely stressful. For the first couple of days, the books didn't arrive, and we were there like doing nothing.
Right.
And we knew that, okay, we're going to have to hand out a shitload of books, thousands of books in a week and stuff like that. But in the end, it panned out really well. We made some great contacts, and since then it's been like more and more international career in energy communications, nuclear advocacy, analysis, and stuff like that. And I've written a couple of books after that. The latest one, which I also translated into English, is called The Age of Energy, which kind of delves into the role of how energy enables modern society and what are the drawbacks of using energy, like the environmental destruction that it might cause, and how has energy transitions historically progressed, and what about the economy, and it's a really kind of wide-ranging book. That actually, the Finnish version won the Science Book of the Year award here in Finland when it came out. So I recommend you check that out. You can find it on Amazon.
For sure, yes. Nice.
Yeah, and since then, in 2018, we founded Think Atom, which is a non-profit think tank that seeks to study and educate and advocate for how we could use, I guess, both current and advanced nuclear technologies to decarbonize our society faster. Because, I mean, it is an underused and misrepresented and misunderstood technology, this nuclear.
For sure. Well, look, I want to get onto that. But first, I kind of want to frame this conversation in just the broader subject of our energy consumption. I think there are kind of these kind of competing views. Some people on the left will say that, you know, essentially we need to be reining ourselves in, using less energy, becoming, you know, more at one with Mother Nature, and kind of, you know, regressing to a kind of more primeval and they would say probably more harmonious species in terms of our planetary impact. And then there are others on the other side who will say that, you know, our energy consumption is very, very closely linked to our progress as a species. I would be, I think, one of those. But like, in your estimation, how closely linked is just energy consumption generally with human well-being and human progress? And like, is this idea of regressing and reducing energy use overall like a reasonable aim?
It depends on where you come from. I mean, we do a lot of dumb stuff with energy that we maybe should not do or could live without doing.
Sure.
And even be more prosperous and feel better. But the problem with that is that it's almost always subjective. So if somebody wants to drive a supercar or Formula One or fly around, is it really my place to say that you should not be allowed to do that and you cannot be getting any enjoyment because that's dumb? Because it's a subjective thing.
Yeah, it's you who thinks that's dumb.
I like playing video games, but maybe my mom thinks that it's stupid.
Sure.
But I see a lot of value and enjoyment in that. So it's always a subjective thing. In general, energy consumption is essential. And the more and the higher quality energy we get to use, the better. That's like the general twist of it.
And when you say the better, when you say just to zero in on that, when you say the better, like what metrics are we talking here? Is it like, you know, human happiness, human survival, like nutrition, like or is it like all of the above?
Yeah, it's. I could almost say that it's all of the above, but these things always have some nuances and complexities.
Okay. Yeah.
And especially the quality of energy, which is something that is often missed in discussions. So let's compare a situation where I can have, let's say, 10 megawatt hours of energy per year. Would I rather take it as electricity or as firewood?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I imagine probably electricity.
Yeah. Even though I can do some stuff. Yeah, I can do some stuff with firewood, but it's actually, it is context dependent. So if I do live in a cave, or if I do live actually in a cabin in the middle of woods, I might want the firewood because I don't have any electrical appliances there. It would be useless for me.
Yeah.
So it's always
So
context dependent.
Does that, if we're talking about the difference between, say, solar and oil and gas, does that kind of translate to hot and cold countries? Like, would you say that in colder countries you'd rather have combustible fossil fuels because it's easier to generate heat, or am I barking up the wrong tree there?
I mean, yeah, we have different needs. It's something like -20 Celsius here in Finland at the moment, so I am burning firewood in my stove,
right?
because the electricity is extremely expensive at the moment.
Right. Yeah.
So it depends. What about that? So there's maybe 1 billion people, or a bit less, something like that, that could use a little bit less energy and could be smarter about their energy use and not lose quality of life.
Okay.
But then there is 7 billion with the opposite situation, who would gain extreme amounts of life quality by using more energy and more modern energy. For example, switching for firewood or charcoal to LPG or electricity for cooking and stuff like that. So regarding that, so actually in the Age of Energy book, we have a discussion about this degrowth that you mentioned in the beginning. And one of the leading degrowthers here in Finland has actually said that that's the most fair and balanced discussion that he has seen about degrowth. So we try to bring kind of the problems and the arguments and the good sides, because we cannot increase our energy consumption endlessly, at least if we stay on this planet, which is something that can be debated. Should we go to Mars and stuff like that? But and after some point, additional energy does not bring much value. Right. But that point is always subjective.
Right. Okay. And I suppose that the consumption, if we look to the future, to new technologies that might be around the corner, like using insane amounts of GPUs to run large language models, or, as you mentioned, going to other planets using, there really is no way, as far as I know, to send rockets into space other than some kind of combustion. You can't get an electric rocket motor. Presumably,
you could use nuclear, though.
Wow. Okay.
Let's not go into that because I don't know almost anything about that. But they are.
Yeah, imagine
sick.
nuclear rockets.
There's some.
Yeah, that's a thought, isn't it? Wow.
Yeah. Imagine a Chernobyl accident going behind your back every second.
Yeah.
The amount of energy
it exploding in the atmosphere. Jesus. God. Yeah. Yeah. Still, I mean, you get a long way with a nuclear engine, wouldn't you? You wouldn't have booster stages or anything. It just keep going all the way to Mars. But yeah. So anyway, so the point being that presumably our demand as a species is only going to continue to increase, and the things, and you just tell me if you think I'm wrong here, but the things that we deem essential will presumably also increase as these technologies become more central to our lives.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the broad trend. Nowadays, I wouldn't consider moving into a house without a gigabit internet, but
yeah, right. Yeah,
me 10 years ago or 20 years ago was like, let me get 1 megabyte. So the level of our demand increases, and what is considered a basic human right changes with time. For example, a decent internet connection in Western world is nowadays considered a basic right, but that's not the case in most of the world. I would guess. and yeah, I mean, this AI thing that has happened recently is a good example of things that kind of came out of nowhere, at least as far as the non-tech pros are considered, like the general society. And now it's like growing like crazy and uses a lot of electricity. So I remember various countries have done these kind of pledges that, okay, we will not use more than this amount of energy or electricity per capita to stay like sustainable and stuff like that. And it's like, it's in at that time it might have made sense because they calculated that, okay, we need this and this and this and this and this service.
Yeah.
But 10 years, 20 years, 30 years after, you have a dozen new basic human rights. I mean, at some point, I would not consider it impossible that some kind of AI robot or something like that would be almost a basic human right for some people in
AI assistant. A little robot if you're old to help you get around the house.
Assist you.
Yeah. I think there's a more general problem there, and this is a bit of a tangent, but there's a more general problem there with us as a species, is that we have too much confidence in our own predictions, and particularly at like governmental levels, they'll spend a lot of time calculating predictions about what they think is going to happen, and because all the smartest people in the room have made these predictions, we as a society kind of tend to take them as being extremely reliable, whereas actually there are far more variables than it's possible for any group of humans to possibly comprehend or calculate. Probably even for an AI to comprehend or calculate. Especially when you've got a whole planet's worth of atoms floating around, and you kind of see this argument playing out with the AI existential risk. The people who are kind of
I mean, you could also think that that's something that gave humans the edge, that we were confident in our projections, like historically, which led to kind of the capability of investing into the future, because we thought that, okay, this is how it's going to be, and this is what we will need next year, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
So maybe,
that's a great point.
But then again, there is this kind of, if you shouldn't. I mean, this is an argument against central planning. Is that if you have a dynamic market with
then the best predictor wins.
Or the nimblest one to adapt to the new situation.
Yes.
But if you have a stiff central planning that says that this cannot happen in the next 5 years, and then it happens anyway, then you cannot.
Yes. Yeah. No.
Change
absolutely.
your act.
Yeah. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I am arguing against central planning. That's exactly what I'm doing. Awesome. So look, so I think we've kind of got a good idea of how humanity's well-being is linked to energy consumption generally, and the points you raised about different areas of society having different requirements, and these are going to change in the future. So let's talk about the present now. When we talk about energy mix, overall, generally, most of us are still using fossil fuels, right? As the majority of the energy mix.
I mean, globally, it's about 80% fossil fuels.
Okay. And in the West, have you got a ballpark?
It's usually maybe a little bit less. I mean, okay, let's take a step back. What do we use when we use energy? Most of the people think that, and that's one of the problems in this kind of energy and climate policy discussion, is that we mix electricity and energy like consistently.
Right.
Even though electricity is about 20% of the energy that we use globally, and maybe 25% around that in the kind of developed world. So the other 75-80%, most of that is actually heat.
Okay.
So space heating, but also industrial process steam and hot temperatures like that.
Melting steel
and then,
into rods and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a surprising amount of heat to do interesting things with chemicals and stuff like that. So that's half of the total energy, roughly. I'm very roughly here. And the rest, maybe 20-25% is liquid fuel for transportation mostly, which is now electrifying at great speed, but that's going to take time. So that's one of the first things that we think about electricity when we talk about energy, and the other way around. Although we should keep them separate and be specific at what we are talking about, because the energy is 5 times bigger than just electricity.
Yeah.
So that means that any challenges we have there, it's going to be 5 times bigger as well.
Yeah.
And
presumably, so when we're talking about industrial processes, just to touch on that briefly, that's mostly going to be gas, right?
Yeah, gas. Well, I mean, I would say it's mostly gas, but there's a surprising amount of oil and coal in there as well.
Right. Okay.
It depends a little bit. I mean, if you have a gas network and supply of gas, then you will use gas because it's the easiest, it's the cleanest.
Yeah.
It depends on the prices. For example, we had this gas crisis here in Europe.
Indeed.
And then some industrial gas users switched fuels. What they did was often they went for a little bit heavier gas, like propane or something like that. So then you're kind of approaching liquids, let's say.
Right. Okay.
So
is that
it's mostly gas, which is why a lot of the European industry is now like quitting.
Yeah. Well, I saw
deindustrializing because gas has become a little bit too expensive.
Some stats about Germany, how their energy consumption is now declining. And I guess in the context of this, like, is energy consumption a good thing or a bad thing for society? Like, what's your take on that? Like, is that some people are framing it as a good thing, saying that, they're using less energy and it's going to create less carbon. But to me, it kind of seems like, their industrial heartland is in decline, and it's almost certainly a bad thing. What's your view?
Yeah. Well, there is nuance. Again. When we had the energy crisis last, like a year ago, I also changed my electricity contract ended just as the shit was hitting the fan in a bad way.
Right. Okay.
In 2022, end of 2022, and I went for a spot contract, so like hourly prices.
Okay.
And the general consensus and discussion here in Finland was, okay, everybody needs to cut their electricity use and energy use, especially electricity, because the Russians had cut the line that we had 1.4 gigawatts. There was uncertainty about Olkiluoto 3, our new nuclear reactor, whether that's going to be operational or not. So there was a lot of kind of unnecessary excitement about whether we will have enough electricity. So I actually did a campaign with my family that, okay, we're gonna cool down the house a couple degrees, use a little bit more firewood, and kind of generally try to use as little electricity as possible. At the same time, we bought an electric car. So a lot of our transportation was now electrified, which we charged at home. But still, we managed to cut our electricity use by a third.
Okay.
In the winter. So and without our kind of prosperity or happiness changing. So there is this kind of, if electricity is cheap, then you use more of it. But then when you go to this kind of industrial applications, you can do something with efficiency gains and fuel switching and stuff like that. But if the situation persists that your fuel is expensive or stuff like that, then it's going to be deindustrialization, and that's a bad thing because then people will be laid off, and that's always problematic. You don't want to have, especially young men without a job, is a no good thing in a society.
Yeah, they get angry. And
they
start
grab the bottle,
things.
and sometimes they drink the bottle, and sometimes they throw the bottle.
Yes.
I mean, I'm really worried about this trend in Germany.
Okay.
Because it's going to have an impact politically as well. AFD, the party it's the kind of far right.
Alternative
immigration critical.
I believe.
They are gaining support, and they gain their support from these kinds of things that people become unhappy with how things are. They are a populist party, so they know how to kind of use that, and that's why I'm very worried about it.
And Germany is a case study in nuclear myopia as well. I would think.
Yeah, I was going to say bad energy policy, but
right,
we can go with nuclear myopia as well.
So look, let's. So I was going to ask you about decarbonisation, but I think we've kind of covered that. Like, just one quick point on decarbonisation. Like, how urgent do you think it is that we decarbonize extremely rapidly as a species? Like, are we? And I know we've just spoken about how human prediction is often wrong, but there seems now to be a kind of the opinion about the pace of decarbonisation seems to be splitting again along political lines, where the left will say that it's extremely urgent, and the right will say that we need to prioritise energy security. You know, we will do it, but we'll do it over a longer time frame. And I suspect there's always going to be nuance in there. But like, what's your view on it? How urgent do you feel it is?
Well, if you take Europe, then decarbonization can also increase energy security because our main source of fossil fuels has been Russia, which has proven to be extremely unreliable. So there's that. Decarbonization actually improves energy security. Then again, it does matter how you do that decarbonization. If you build nuclear reactors, that's extremely energy secure because they're reliable and produce stable baseload. But if you do it with wind and solar, that's good. But at certain point, you might run into troubles because of the unpredictability and variability of the production profile. So, for example, at the start of the year, we had record prices here in Finland because it had been very cold for a week, and then there was problems with some thermal power plants, as well as not that much wind, and almost no solar because it's winter. So we had extremely high prices for a couple of days. So we do need to decarbonize. We need to be smart about it. The problem with this debate, in my view, in the West, is that some people use it as an excuse to do anything, and then some people don't want to do anything. Because again, it's a little bit arrogant to assume that we can tell the 7 billion people around the world that would like to use more energy that now you need to stop what you're doing and not even use as much as you're using now because you're using mostly fossil fuels. So it's not going to work.
They're just not going to listen. Aside from that,
I mean,
why would they?
Why should they? It would be extremely irresponsible from their leaders to kind of cause extreme short-term harm to the population to support something that is far away in the future. and they can only have a tiny impact on.
Yeah.
So this kind of preference for what's happening to me personally compared to what's happening all around, and what's happening now compared to what's happening in 20 years, 50 years, whatever. So it's a quite of natural to prefer the close and the today over the far away and far in the future point of view, which is a big problem in the climate thing, because for a long time it has been something that's happening mainly somewhere else and far in the future, kind of stuff. It's become more current lately, but yeah, at the same time we need to decarbonize extremely fast, but we need to have a plan. And it's just
it's always a good start. Yeah,
we need to be urgent, but not like stupidly urgent.
yeah. Okay. So look, you've touched on nuclear there in your answer, and I want to make sure that we've got plenty of time to talk about nuclear. So, do you want to give me a brief intro on the potential of nuclear power to provide and decarbonize our energy? I'll leave a big open question there, and then we can drill down into some of the details. So, if you know, I know this is something you know a lot about. So, on the top level, why should we be thinking about it, and what's the potential there?
Yeah, well, why? It's reliable. It uses very little land. It uses very little materials overall. It has a small environmental footprint. So it's the best clean energy source that we have by these measures. The problems. So the potential is well, everybody gets their panties in a twist when you say limitless, but close to.
So to be clear, nuclear could theoretically, if it were embraced fully, provide for all of our energy needs.
It would not be smart to do everything with nuclear, but yes. I mean, theoretically, you can do that with anything, as long as you just build enough batteries and build enough overcapacity, for example, for solar. Right. There are these arguments that it's not a huge area that you need to fill with solar to supply all the energy that humanity uses. It is quite big, but compared to the whole kind of Earth surface area, it's not that big.
Yeah.
But then,
if you had batteries, then it would be reliable, and so you'd get around the main problem.
Enough batteries, and then pretty much basically like that. So you can do that with any source, but
why would
it make sense?
Why would you not advocate just doing that rather than building nuclear then?
Because I do think that the energy mix needs to be somewhat diversified.
Okay.
Like I said, nuclear has the smallest footprint, pretty much by any measure. It's also the safest energy source. So the environmental impact of going nuclear is smaller than pretty much anything else.
Smaller than solar?
Yeah. Solar takes quite a bit of area. It also takes quite a bit of materials and mining and stuff like that.
Sure.
Then you need the batteries, which also take area and more mining.
Yeah. Okay.
And apparently people fall from roofs and die when they install solar, or will take the snow away or something like that. So it's actually might be more dangerous than nuclear.
Wow, even from accidents.
Per energy unit produced.
Wow. God, that's a metric. How many accidental deaths per unit
there's
of
this
energy?
Deaths per terawatt hour is the official metrics. How many people die per terawatt hour of electricity produced?
Wow. Okay, and so
you can Google that. There's some charts.
And so what has the lowest number of deaths per terawatt hour?
No, I mean basically it's wind, nuclear, and solar.
Right.
Each of them have a tiny, because they're burning stuff will always be
Dangerous.
harmful because particles go into our lungs and kill us prematurely. Hydro is also quite safe, but we have had some extremely catastrophic hydro accidents that have killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
okay.
But as long as it's clean, it's also quite safe.
I'm sure the hydro accidents are probably terrifying.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
If you live downstream from a hydro dam and it, for some reason, bursts or explodes, I mean, you cannot go inside your house and stay there for a couple of weeks.
No. The house is the house will go the same way as you, which is a long way downstream, I imagine.
Indeed.
Okay. All right. So nuclear has this great potential. I want to talk about the development of the technology, but first, I just want to get an understanding of why you think it's been so maligned. Why? So there is this almost visceral reaction against nuclear, against this, the kind of glowing green rock on the Simpsons, and all of this idea of the toxic waste that will turn us all into mutants. There's this real kind of almost like psychological reaction of disgust that a society seems to have had somehow to what is really, as far as I can tell, an extremely clean technology. So, why do you think that is? Is it all to do with the Chernobyl accident, or where has this come from, and how justified is it?
Well, now that you mentioned, there's actually a great book about that, "The Rise of Nuclear Fear" by Spencer Weart. I don't know how to pronounce that.
For listeners, Rauli, if you don't mind sending me links to all the books that you've mentioned in the show, I'll put them all in the show notes so that anybody listening can go and check them out, your books and the books that you've mentioned. So listeners, you'll find reference to this book in the show notes.
Great. So to put it very shortly, it's complicated. So there's a lot of reasons, starting from this kind of fear of the mystical stuff, because basically nuclear energy is as close to magic as you can get. You're actually transmuting matter into new matter. It's the original alchemy thing that has a long history in the public imagination of humanity. And then harnessing this amount of power, of energy, is almost like being a god. So there's also this kind of man should not play God type of narrative in our society. Then there's the atomic weapons, the Cold War that people got really scared about. And then, well, I mean, the anti-nuclear movement and the environmental movement started all out as being anti-weapons testing, atmospheric weapons testing of nuclear weapons. Can you imagine that we blew up like a shit ton of nuclear devices in our atmosphere just for the fun of it, just to find out what it does and how it works? That was crazy.
Talking about doing dumb things with energy.
Yeah, indeed. And one of the versions of the story goes that they actually got this kind of surprise victory when the atmospheric nuclear weapons testing was banned quite fast after, because also the leaders of the world realized that, okay, this is not a smart idea. Let's try to ban this, and they made the ban. So after that, the environmental movement, which actually originally a lot of the people in there liked nuclear because of the characteristics that we talked about earlier. It's clean and all this stuff. But then there came this kind of argument. Well, there's a quote on this that imagine all the bad things that humans could do with that much energy. Yeah. I mean, that's it. It brings up a lot of bad stuff, like bad ideas. But I mean, you should also imagine all the good stuff that we could do with plentiful energy. There's a lot more of those.
And we can do pretty bad stuff with electricity as well, you know.
Like, yeah, and the thing is that if you have a lack of energy, then you start to do really bad stuff.
Right.
Then you go to war to get energy. Then you burn your environment to get just heat. There's deforestation, and that leads to all kind of problems with the soil eroding and all the stuff that in for example, Africa, where you have to walk for miles and miles on end to collect and carry a few sticks back home so you can cook food, and then you get lung disease from all the smoke, and like it's a disaster. That's because of lack of energy. Bad stuff we have to do because we don't have clean energy. So there's always also that side to the story. But yeah, it's really complicated, and at some point the environmental movement that was quite recent adopted this anti-nuclear position, and they have managed to influence a lot of our institutions and people and leaders of that, and the kind of public narrative has for a long time, decades now, been quite anti-nuclear. We only discuss nuclear in a bad light. Let's just put it like that. Only recently has the discussion around nuclear, for example, in the mainstream media, started to bring up the benefits and the good sides, like the reliability and security of supply, and that it's zero carbon and all this stuff of nuclear. For a long time before that, it was only about the accidents, only about the waste, only about the cost, only about the project that took too long, and proliferation risk of weapons materials, and only about the kind of risks and bad stuff, which are well managed, by the way, by the nuclear industry. Extremely well managed. I mean, can you imagine? Well, the thing is, when you ask people, what do you think the most dangerous energy source is? The most common answer is nuclear.
Yeah, I would have
even though we just discussed that it's actually the safest.
Yeah.
Like that's like the mind that we have gone through as a society. Like and then what's the biggest problem? Nuclear waste. Well, and there's this kind of, it's this horrible stuff that's extremely harmful, that kills people a million years into the future and whatever. But then again, we have managed spent nuclear fuel, which is the highly radioactive waste, so well that it has never harmed anybody in the 60 years that it has existed. So it cannot be that dangerous. It's a bit like a fireplace. It's dangerous if you put your head into the fireplace when it's on, but you can manage it by staying a little bit far away and having maybe something between you and the fire. And it's so dangerous but manageable.
Right. So on the waste then. So I think a lot of people have this idea in popular consciousness that nuclear waste is this green sludge that's like, like a vat of acid or something. All we're talking about here is rods of metal, right, that need to be cased in something to stop them giving off radiation that presumably it might give you cancer or something, and so you might die of some kind of cause of mortality. But it's like, how dangerous is it? And so it is just rods of metal, right? And how dangerous are they to be around, first of all? And then how is it managed?
So most of our reactors are so-called light water reactors, water-cooled and water-moderated, and the fuel is this kind of gummy bear-sized ceramic pellets.
Oh, really?
Which are inside the rod, which are in the assembly. And so there's actually multiple barriers that protect the environment from the radiation. One is the thing that it's ceramic, it's solid, so it doesn't leak, it doesn't dissolve in a way that you see in The Simpsons. It might be a green goo that's in the river or something like that. There is liquid radioactive waste as well, for example, from the weapons programs. But I would not mix that with civilian nuclear reactors.
Okay.
So it's solid. It doesn't leak. It doesn't melt or dissolve in water. Then you have the rods, which are zirconium metal, and they also protect it. And then you have the assemblies. So you have a lot of barriers, and the basic idea is that you have a lot of these barriers that are not dependent on each other. So even if some of them fails, the other one will still protect you. Then, of course, when you have spent fuel straight from the reactor, fresh, it's extremely dangerous. It's very hot and very radioactive, which is why they, for example, move it underwater, because water is a great barrier. A couple meters of water stops all the radioactivity. So you could actually basically swim in a cooling pool of nuclear waste, because the waste would be there in the bottom and there would be a couple of meters of water between you. You just don't dive too deep.
Right. Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, immediately I just think, so it can't be that bad. Like, if it's a couple of meters of water, obviously we don't live our lives underwater, but yeah. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. And the thing is that the more radioactive it is, as it is in the start, it's actually also a measure of how quickly it gets less radioactive. So because it's the half-life,
right?
And in the beginning, the most radioactive stuff is the ones with the shortest half-life,
right?
But they also disappear the fastest.
Yeah.
So after maybe, let's say, let's play it safe and say 1,000 years. After 1,000 years, spent nuclear fuel is only dangerous if you ingest it somehow,
right?
Like eat it. And even then, the most of the harm comes from the fact that uranium is a toxic heavy metal and it will harm your kidney, not from the radioactivity.
Yeah, it's probably never a good idea to eat uranium then.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even lick it, but because it's a toxic heavy metal, but radioactivity actually has not much to do with it. But again, this idea, if you compare it to the fact, the public discussion about nuclear waste, that it's deadly, it's the deadliest thing, and it will be lethal for 100,000 years. That's just not true. I mean, you would literally have to go there, take the pellets, grind them to dust, snort them to your lungs, or eat them consistently, and even then, the radioactivity would probably be not the kind of thing that ends up harming you, but the actual toxic heavy metalness of uranium. So,
okay, so the waste is stored and disposed of safely. Like, we put it in like concrete tubes, right, and lock it underground or something.
Yeah, you have a cask that you put the assemblies in. And there's actually a couple ways to do it. So far, what we have done has been intermediate storage.
Okay.
So it's like waiting there, either in the pool of water or in what's called dry casks, which can actually be in like a parking lot outside. They have a lot of this in the United States.
Oh, really?
They're storing the spent fuel after it has cooled down in a water pool for some time. Then they put it in dry cask and it's air cooled, just outside. Or the kind of ultimate goal is to have a long-term or final disposal in, for example, a deep geological repository. where you put the casks and then you fill it with bentonite and concrete and rocks and stuff like that, and it's like half a kilometer below the surface, and it's never gonna bother anybody again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so is there the big thing that I think sticks in people's minds from civilian nuclear that's a worry is Chernobyl, right? And then more recently, you've had the accident in Japan at Fukushima. Why should, would you ever be worried that another Chernobyl could happen? And if not, why not?
Well, Chernobyl is a design that would have never been built in the West.
Right. Okay.
So it was built by the Soviet Union. And I don't know how deep into the details we need to go with that, but basically in the light water reactors in the West, if you take away the coolant, which is important to keep the fuel cool, but it also transfers the heat to then make the power. If you take the coolant away, you also stop the reaction.
Right.
Because the water acts as the moderator for the neutrons flying around, and which makes them more likely to hit another uranium atom and cause the chain reaction. But in the Chernobyl design, the RBMK, this is not the case.
Okay.
It uses graphite as the moderator, so actually it could accelerate the reaction if you take the water away, and then you would have nothing to take the heat. So no, it's not going to happen in West simply because of this. Then again, there are still some RBMKs, so Chernobyl type reactors, operational in Russia. They have been updated to kind of, and hopefully the operators have been trained a little better not to do silly experiments, which was the cause of the Chernobyl accident. So theoretically it's possible because there still exists operational Chernobyl type reactors, but they will be phased out in the I don't remember, in the near future, let's say. But yeah, I mean, as long as you operate them strictly according to the manual, they are safe. Humans are not always very good at that, so that's so why we had the
and there's not a worry that poor reactor design or poor management or maintenance could happen somewhere, perhaps not in Finland or in the UK or France or whatever, but if we're advocating to grow nuclear use globally, is there not some degree of concern that this technology might be implemented badly and could lead again to catastrophic results?
Well, always concern when humans are involved, but that's why we design reactors nowadays to be kind of foolproof. So even with humans making mistakes, they cannot melt down and have automatic systems that rely on the laws of physics, for example, to cool down the reactor. So the problem is, if something happens and the reactor always shuts down automatically, but you still need to cool the fuel because there is some decay going on in the fuel, which causes heat, which can cause a melting of the fuel, which can then release a lot of the fission products and radioactive stuff. So the cooling is the kind of important thing, which is why some of the next generation SMR, so small modular reactors or advanced reactors, are often designed in a way that they are passively cooled. So you don't actually need to have a pump to circulate water. It's done with natural convection or something like that. Or maybe it's a molten salt that houses the fuel. So how can you have a meltdown accident if the fuel is already molten to begin with? So that's like the normal operational status of that. So
I was going to ask you about the small modular reactors. But so what happened at Fukushima then? Because that wasn't a disaster. There was a natural disaster which wiped out, but it didn't melt down. There was some risk that it might.
It did,
as far as I
actually.
Understand it. It did melt down. Okay.
Yeah. So 3 of the reactors. I haven't read about it. We've wrote a chapter in our book, The Dark Horse, about this, but that's a long time ago. So
okay.
Forgive me if I remember something wrong. But 3 of the reactors did have a meltdown, and there was a radioactive release. Let's just say that mistakes were made, both early on in Japan, not building high enough walls to protect from tsunamis. Apparently, the international community had told them that you should do this, but then you have this human problem that in the Japanese culture, you do not question your superior.
Right.
And if the superior had decided that these walls are high enough, then building a bigger wall would have been admitting a mistake, or somebody below him or her would have needed to go there and demand that bigger walls are built. So there was this kind of cultural thing that is a human factor there, which is why we need to design these things properly. But then again, so mistakes were made both before the accident, like not building a bigger wall, and not having a spare diesel generator put somewhere a little bit further away, and stuff like that. But also in the accident management, there was some mistakes that did end up causing the release and the meltdown of the fuel, at least partly. But that we have to remember that, for example, the number 1 reactor there, I think it was built in the 70s and maybe designed in the 60s without much computers. So it was an unfortunate accident. It has and will cause no fatalities, so that's a relief. A good colleague of mine has said that it was an annoying mid-grade industrial accident that we made into something else. Because I mean, you have quite frequently you have industrial accidents that actually result in people dying, but in the Fukushima nobody died. Well, there was a couple people that died, but not due to the radioactive thing, but other things. I mean, 20,000 people died thanks to the tsunami. So
it was a tsunami. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I guess in that context, it's actually, like it's just an extremely tiny fraction of the total destruction done by a tsunami, right?
And I mean, basically, the biggest destruction has been done since then with the closures of nuclear fleets, both in Japan, but also in Germany, that accelerated their plans.
Yeah. That Germany, it was a crazy overreaction, wasn't it? Like, there's really no two ways about it.
How many tsunamis could you get in Germany?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so look, let's. We're coming up on an hour, and I want to talk about the future of the technology. So you mentioned small modular reactors. Is that the main and most exciting development in the technology behind nuclear? Or like I hear people talking about new nuclear as like this kind of next generation, next wave of nuclear energy technology. Are we essentially talking about small modular reactors, or is there a whole host of different developments that are exciting in the field?
It's small modular reactors is a very wide umbrella term of different sizes that can be basically 10 times or even more different from in capacity. It also hosts widely different nuclear reactor technologies, from light water reactors to heavy water reactors to lead-cooled reactors, molten salt reactors, gas-cooled reactors of different types. So at the moment, there's, I think, more than 60 reactor developers developing different types of advanced reactors or small modular reactors around the world. So there's a lot of very exciting development going on. Recently, there has been some disappointment. Some of those developers have gone into trouble financially and otherwise.
Right.
But that's to be expected. I don't think that we will have 60 different types of SMRs, small reactors, becoming commercialized. So there's going to be a lot of consolidation, and hopefully we will get good designs that will be actually built in large quantities. So my kind of advocacy started with advanced reactors like the breeder reactor, which uses the energy in the uranium fuel 50 to 100 times more efficiently than a normal reactor.
Wow.
So I got really, and it's not science fiction. It was the first reactor that produced electricity to a light bulb was a breeder reactor in the United States.
Oh wow!
Called the experimental breeder reactor number 2, EBR2. And there's a couple running in Russia at the moment, and a few startups are designing new types of breeder reactors. So that's exciting, but it was sort of like a gateway drug to me to get excited about this technology that's in the future and very, very aspirational. And then I started to look into nuclear more in general and ended up finding out that, okay, these kind of giant light water reactors that we have are actually great. We just have to figure out the cheaper way and faster way to build them, because apparently we have lost that, especially in the West. I mean, China, South Korea, these places, they build reactors on budget, on schedule, at low cost still. But Europe and the United States, North America has lost this kind of, it's partly because that if you don't do something for 30 years, then you will lose all the expertise, all the experienced project managers, all the supply chains will go away, and the whole industry, and even the regulators don't know how to regulate new builds because they have not done it. All the people have retired that used to do that shit. So you have to relearn all that stuff, and that's going to take time and money.
I think there's a broader malaise. Like, I mean, particularly here in the UK, I don't know about Finland, but here in the UK, it's like a running joke that we just can't build infrastructure anymore. Like we had this high-speed rail line that was supposed to be going from London up to the north of the country that's been going on for a decade, and then they cancelled it because they can't get anything done. And you know, we've had these nuclear power plants at Hinkley and Sizewell, I believe, that have been, you know, on again, off again.
I mean, the problem with Hinkley, the actual construction project has been progressing quite well, but the problem was the 15 years of going on and off and discussing and not getting
anything done.
Which is like, I mean, we need to find out how to avoid that.
Stuff. But it seems like there's this. It seems like it's. I mean, I may be wrong and extrapolating here, but it feels like in the West more generally, we're getting slower.
It is a feature of democracy. If it's also a bug.
Okay.
Everybody has their say, and things don't move fast. But that also limits bad things from moving fast. So it is a bug, but it's also a feature. It's actually one of the core features.
If you think about the USA in, like, you know, the last century, you know, the USA in like the 1950s and 60s, they were building everything left and right. You know, they were going full speed ahead all the time. That was a democracy. You know, why can't we run democracies like that anymore?
Well, for example, the Liberty ships that they built, like during the war, the key word there is during the war.
Yeah.
So it was a war economy that was not. Yeah, it was like build these things or else.
Yeah.
Build these things and you will be compensated well, and or else.
Yeah.
So and well, the thing is that you really have to do something multiple times to learn how to do it well. I know it's a novel thought, but you get better at stuff that you do every day.
Well, totally. And with nuclear, you think the anchor of our understanding of nuclear is so rooted in like 1960s technology, right? And like the initial designs of nuclear power plants. And I don't know when the Chernobyl reactor was designed, but probably like what, the 50s or 60s, right?
Yeah,
If you
somewhere
think
there.
about any other field of technology, how far it's come from the designs of the 1950s to the present day. Look at a computer, right? Like the 1950s computer, it's an entire room of spinning things, right? And now it's in your pocket and it does like more things than you could ever have imagined. Presumably, you have a rate of progress in any technological development. People just can't remap their understanding of technological advance onto nuclear. I think because it's quite technical and quite sort of industrial, and they're just not that interested in it. But presumably, there'll have been a similar kind of dramatic increase in the quality of the technology.
Yeah, and I mean, funnily enough, that's also a little bit of a problem with nuclear.
Right.
The thing is that they are big projects that you need to decide on like 10, 15 years before the product actually gets built.
Right.
And if you have a lot of like improvements like steadily coming into the design, then you never get to decide that, okay, this is when we lock it in and this is the one that we will build.
Yeah.
And then 5 years after you made that decision, when you actually start building it, there's a new design, and maybe the regulator has changed some regulations, and you need to apply some changes to the design. And so it's a little bit of a problem with nuclear industry that we would have to lock in a design when it's good enough instead of always pursuing the perfect.
Right.
Like the next one will be perfect and the next one will be perfect. So I'm not going to buy this one. We have to lock in and agree that, okay, we're going to make 100 of these. And then maybe the version 2, we will spend 20 years developing that and doing that and focus on cost efficiency instead of endlessly going for more and more and more safety features, which add up cost. And then after we build 100 of these, maybe we'll build another 100 of those.
Are there any technologies that where the advance is that it's quicker to implement? So are there any reactors that you could build and deploy quickly?
Thank God that has been the design one of the design principles of the advanced reactors many times is they should be easy to construct. For example, there are some designs that are designed to be mounted on a barge and built in a shipyard. Wow. Shipyards are the most efficient ways people have come up to make large things, while going into the middle of forest and constructing something from relatively small parts or modules is the least effective. So that's how we've been building this new big nuclear project. But if you could build something in a shipyard or maybe a factory like an SMR, they're often designed to be factory manufactured. So you have a module that's then just shipped into a location and assembled there instead of like creating it from parts. So there's and the global shipyard capacity is surprisingly immense. We make thousands of ships each year, and a lot of those are actually oil and gas production and exploration stuff. So if we could make those into nuclear ships instead, we would actually be replacing the energy need that
nuclear ships.
So, you could. Well, if I just to throw out the scale here, let's say we have a little bit more than 400 gigawatts of nuclear capacity around the world. You could build that much in the shipyards with just the spare capacity that we already have now in a year.
Wow. That's a hell of a stat.
Yeah, I mean,
so why don't we do it? So why are we not doing this then?
I did a study or two about this a couple of years ago, in which I kind of, and my co-authors as well, tried to kind of ask this question: why are we not doing this? And it's actually progressing. I think it was in October last year, the IAEA, which is the international watchdog of the nuclear industry, held its first kind of seminar conference for floating nuclear power plants that are shipyard built. Well, I mean, they could be floating or they could be attached to the bottom of the seabed or whatever. But the key here is that they would be manufactured in a shipyard, and then you could tow them anywhere in the world.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay.
Thing would be that you are making them in the same place very efficiently, learning with the same crew instead of like every project having 5,000 people from at least 50 different countries not speaking the same language, and then you try to manage how to construct the thing. You have the same team doing the same thing over and over, so that gets really efficient really fast.
Yeah.
So that's actually stuff that should be coming more and more in the
that's
near
exciting.
future. Yeah,
I find that very exciting.
Extremely.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, and so look, I'm gonna wrap shortly. We don't have too long left. You've been very generous with your time. Is there anything that I haven't covered here in terms of the potential or new technologies or things that you're personally excited about that you think would be good to get out there before we kind of wrap up? Is there anything I've missed?
Well, I mean, I guess just the broad scale and urgency of if we are to decarbonize in time to keep warming around 2 degrees or somewhere there, we need this kind of change that we build 100 gigawatts of new nuclear every year for that to happen. You probably heard about this hydrogen hype economy thing for the last some years.
Yeah.
So if you do the math and you look at how much fossil fuels we use now, or how much the forecasts see that we would use in 2050 or something like that, you would need maybe 1 billion tons of hydrogen per year just to make a dent in that, like to replace the fossil fuels that we are still seeing will be used in different applications by 2050. So to make 1 billion tons of hydrogen, you would need maybe almost double the current global electricity production just to make that hydrogen. So that's the scale. And you really need to have something like a shipyards manufacturing these things in series to kind of even approach those numbers. So yeah, I mean, that's, to be honest, that's this kind of factory made reactors is, I mean, we should still build big reactors as well, because that's now something we have been learning how to do, and we have been doing, and that's something that we can do now. So let's not kill the nuclear construction industry again in Europe, for example, because now we build stuff in Finland, we build stuff in France, build stuff in the UK and in the Eastern Europe. But for example, if you look at these newcomer countries, Poland, you have Estonia, Sweden is planning new reactors, France has just announced that they maybe need more than a dozen new reactors. We will need the kind of demand for skilled labor and supply chains to manage all that building in the next 20, 30 years. We need to build that.
Yeah.
It's going to be a challenge. The bottlenecks there are exist and are real. So that's something that we need to focus on. Meanwhile, we also plan for these kind of shipyard made or factory made smaller reactors that we can deploy, maybe also for industrial heat purposes. As we talked, industrial heat is a big portion of our energy use. That's not well served with big reactors that make only electricity or mainly electricity. You can do something with because I mean the nuclear reaction creates heat, which you turn into steam, and then you run a turbine. So you could use that steam for an industrial purpose as well, but it's not very high quality in terms of temperature from the current. So you would need advanced reactors to get hotter steam and to make, for example, hydrogen more efficiently for various purposes.
But if we could like use nuclear for everything else, or a mix of nuclear and renewables for everything else, if all of our transport became electrified, apart from perhaps transport that requires higher better
aviation
energy density, like shipping and
shipping and
high tonnage haulage and that sort of stuff, potentially could use hydrogen. But if that's
or synthetic fuels made from hydrogen.
Okay. But then, so just as a general point here, if we were able to do all of that, then presumably it wouldn't be the end of the world if we were still using some natural gas to run industrial processes. I mean, obviously it wouldn't be ideal to be emitting anything, but the scale of the impact would be greatly reduced, right? If that's all that you needed to use it for.
I mean, the last 20% is going to be the hardest, and the last 5% is going to be even harder, and the last 2% are even harder. So I wouldn't focus on those. I would just focus on getting to scale as fast as possible, because there's plenty of fossil fuels to replace, even in
and loads of low-hanging
electricity
fruit, right?
production.
Yeah. So that's probably the easiest thing, right? Is consumer electricity going completely...
I mean, the 2 steps that you need to go is electrify everything and then produce that electricity cleanly.
Yeah.
But you cannot electrify everything, because fuels are superior in some uses. For example, aviation, especially long distance. You can have some electric airplanes flying shorter distances, but if you want to switch a continent, then it's going to be a rocket or an airplane.
Yeah, and that's because of energy density, right?
Yeah. You just there's limited space and weight that you can use for your energy source.
And batteries are very heavy. I heard somewhere that some multi-story car park. I don't know if this is true. It might just be a myth, but some multi-story car parks in certainly here in the UK, maybe everywhere, aren't going to work anymore because there's too many electric cars that have got heavy batteries, and they're not designed to carry all of the weight.
Oh wow!
So they
are a little bit heavier, in general.
But
you could maybe add 50% to the total weight.
Yeah, don't know how.
Well, you just have to have less cars. I guess you could. You finally have big parking spaces.
Yeah.
One car's going to take 2 places because they're heavy.
Yeah. People love their cars, man. Cool. Okay. Well, look, it's been awesome to talk to you, Rauli. I really appreciate you giving me so much time. You're extremely knowledgeable about this. I feel like I could sit here talking to you about energy and geopolitics and all of it all day. It's a super interesting subject, and look, for what it's worth, I'm with you, man. Like this idea of getting the shipyards churning out reactors quickly, deploying them quickly, and decarbonising quickly with good reliable energy sounds to me like a plan. So yeah, thanks very much for joining me, and it's been great having you on.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, and let's talk again.
Awesome. Yes. So stick with me. I'm just going to stop recording and make sure that it's uploading.